It's 11:47 p.m. You've got 4 tabs open: a workout plan, a course you bought back in January and never finished, a to-do list with 14 things on it, and your bank account, which, if we're honest, is the real reason you're doing any of this. You close the laptop. Tomorrow, you tell yourself. Tomorrow it all changes. You know exactly how tomorrow goes. The alarm goes off at 5:40. You don't get up. It goes off again at 6:15. You get up. But the version of you standing in the kitchen is not the version who made the plan last night. That version wanted a run and a green smoothie. This version wants 5 more minutes of silence and whatever's fastest. By 8 p.m., you're lying on the couch, scrolling, and somewhere in the back of your head, a voice says, "You had one job. You didn't even try." Here's what nobody tells you about that voice. It's wrong. Not wrong that you didn't do the thing. Wrong about why. You were never lazy. You were relying on something that was never built to survive contact with a Tuesday. That thing is motivation. And I want to start with the part that's going to annoy some of you. Motivation was never going to save you. Not because you're broken, not because you lack character, because of what motivation actually is, mechanically, inside your skull. It is not a personality trait. It's a chemical event. Specifically, it's a spike in dopamine, and dopamine spikes are, by design, temporary. Stanford psychiatrist Anna Lembke, in her book Dopamine Nation, describes how the brain works like a scale. Every spike of desire, of yes, this time will be different, gets balanced out by an equal dip afterward, a kind of chemical come-down. You feel amazing when you buy the course. You feel amazing when you screenshot the meal plan. That feeling is real. It's also, by design, on a timer. Nobody warns you that the timer is running the moment you feel it, so the plan you made at 11:47 p.m. wasn't a bad plan. It was a plan built entirely out of a chemical that had already started decaying before you fell asleep. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because if that were the whole story, we'd all just be doomed. And we're not. There's a second piece, and it's the piece that actually explains why some people seem to do the hard thing on a random Tuesday with no spike, no hype, no main character energy at all. It's not that they have more discipline than you. It's that somewhere along the way, without necessarily realizing it, they changed a different variable. Not the wanting, the doing. And that variable is one you've been ignoring completely. I'll show you exactly what it is in a minute, because once you see it, you can't unsee it, and you'll start noticing it's the actual reason behind almost every failure you've ever blamed on laziness. Let's talk about what actually predicts whether you do something. Behavior scientist B.J. Fogg spent years at Stanford's Behavior Design Lab studying this exact question, and he landed on a strikingly simple model. Behavior happens when 3 things line up at the same moment: motivation, ability, and a prompt. Miss any one of them and the behavior doesn't happen. It doesn't matter how badly you want it. Most people, when they fail to do something, assume the missing piece was motivation. Fogg's research suggests that's usually the wrong diagnosis. The piece that's actually missing, most of the time, is ability. Meaning, how easy is this to actually do? Right now, in this exact moment, with this exact amount of energy you have. Think about your 5:40 a.m. plan again. At 11:47 p.m., go for a run felt easy because you were imagining it, not doing it, and imagining things is always easy. At 5:40 a.m., with 4 hours of sleep and a cold room and shoes that are somewhere in the closet, go for a run is not easy. The task didn't change. Your ability to execute it in that specific moment collapsed. And when ability collapses, your brain doesn't need much motivation to talk you out of it. It needs almost none, because the cost-benefit math just doesn't work anymore. This is the part that made me stop, personally. I used to think I was one of those people who just doesn't have follow-through. I signed up for a language app 3 separate times over 3 separate years. Deleted it all 3 times within a month. I told myself a story about it. Some people are built for discipline. I'm not one of them. Then I actually looked at what I was asking myself to do. Not learn Spanish. What I'd actually committed to in my head was 20 minutes a day, every day, indefinitely, forever, with no clear finish line. 20 minutes sounds small. Forever is not small. Forever is the biggest ask there is. I wasn't failing at Spanish. I was failing at a task I had, without noticing, made enormous. So if ability is the lever, not motivation, that raises an obvious question. And it's one we're going to answer properly in a minute. How do you actually make something easier in a way that isn't just try harder at feeling ready? Because try harder is motivation language again, and we already established the timer on that. But before we get there, there's a second reason your ability quietly collapses, and it has nothing to do with the size of the task at all. It's about timing, and it's something almost nobody accounts for. Your capacity to act isn't flat across the day. It's not even flat across the week. There's a reason the plan that felt bulletproof at midnight, made in a calm, fed, rested state, falls apart at 5:40 a.m. in a depleted one. And it's not a coincidence, and it's not bad luck. It's that you made the decision using the wrong version of yourself. The you at 11:47 p.m. and the you at 5:40 a.m. are, functionally, two different decision makers, with two different amounts of fuel in the tank. Plan made by version 1, execution demanded from version 2. Of course it collapses. You never actually broke a promise to yourself. You asked a tired stranger to keep a promise made by someone else. That reframe matters more than it sounds like it should. Because the second you stop treating this as a character flaw, you stop wasting energy on guilt. And guilt, by the way, is not neutral. It doesn't just feel bad, it actively drains the exact resource you need to try again tomorrow. Every night you go to bed telling yourself you're lazy, undisciplined, a person who can't stick to anything, you're not describing a fact. You're writing tomorrow's ability score a little lower. You're making the next attempt harder before it's even started. So let's name what we actually know so far, because this is the part where the pieces start clicking together. 1. Motivation is a chemical spike with a built-in expiration date. It was never designed to carry you across weeks or months. 2. The actual predictor of whether you act isn't how much you want something, it's how easy that action is to execute in the exact moment you're standing in. And most of our plans quietly make things harder, not easier, without us noticing. 3. You're not one continuous person making one continuous decision. You're a rotating cast of versions of yourself with wildly different amounts of fuel. And blaming you for what tired you couldn't do is like being angry at a phone for dying when you never charged it. None of that is an excuse to do nothing. It's the opposite, actually. It's the reason the next part works. Because if the problem was never your character, then the fix was never become a more disciplined person. The fix is mechanical. It's a switch. And there are exactly 3 moves that come from flipping it. One that shrinks the size of what you're asking yourself to do until your tired self can actually do it. One that borrows proof from somewhere you'd never expect so your brain stops treating the goal as impossible. And one that changes what you say to yourself at the exact moment you fail, so that failure stops being the end of the attempt and starts being part of it. I'm going to show you all 3, in order, with exactly how to use each one starting today. And the first one is something you can do in the next 10 minutes, before you even finish watching this. That's next. You said 10 minutes, let's use them. Move 1, the one you can do right now, tonight, before you close this tab. It's not get more motivated. It's the opposite. It's making the task so small that motivation stops being required at all. Remember the language app I deleted 3 times? On the 4th try, I didn't set a 20-minute goal. I set a 1-sentence goal. Open the app, translate 1 sentence. That's it. That's the whole commitment. It sounds almost insulting how small that is, which is exactly the point. B.J. Fogg's research at Stanford's Behavior Design Lab is built on this single idea. When a behavior is small enough, your tired, depleted 5:40 a.m. self can still do it because there's no ability gap left to fall through. You're not relying on the version of you with fuel in the tank. You've made the task doable by any version of you. 1 sentence, most days, turned into 3 sentences some days, and 10 on the good ones. But the good ones only existed because the bad ones didn't break the chain. Consistency came first. Size came later, on its own, without me forcing it. So tonight's assignment isn't finally commit to the big goal. It's take whatever you've been failing at and shrink it until it's almost embarrassing how easy it is. Not work out for 45 minutes. Put your shoes on and stand by the door. Not write the chapter. Open the document and write one sentence. If your honest reaction is, "That's too easy to count," you found the right size. That feeling of, "This barely counts," is the ability gap closing. But here's the problem that move 1 doesn't touch. You can make the task tiny and still not start it. Because before you even get to the doing, there's a belief question running in the background. Can someone like me actually pull this off? And that belief isn't formed by logic. It's formed, in large part, by who you've watched succeed. This is where a lot of advice quietly goes wrong. The instinct is to look up to someone enormous. A billionaire, an Olympic athlete, someone who climbed out of nothing and became a legend, and use them as proof it's possible. Psychologist Albert Bandura, whose research on self-efficacy shaped how we understand motivation for decades, found something more specific than role models help. He found that watching someone succeed only builds your own belief in yourself when you perceive that person as similar to you. Similar starting point, similar resources, similar constraints. Watching a superhuman outlier doesn't build belief. It can actually do the opposite, because your brain quietly files them under "not like me," and the achievement stays sealed off in someone else's category. So move 2 is, stop hunting for the most impressive example. Hunt for the most relatable one. Not the founder on the magazine cover, the person 2 steps ahead of you, doing the unglamorous version of the thing you're trying to do, who started roughly where you're standing right now. When I was stuck on that language app, the thing that actually moved the needle wasn't a story about a polyglot genius. It was watching a coworker. Same job, same exhaustion, same excuses I had. Get through a single conversation in another language after months of doing exactly what I just described to you. 1 sentence a day. Nothing heroic about it. That's exactly why it worked. My brain couldn't file her under "not like me." That handles the belief problem before you even take the first step. But it doesn't handle the moment everyone actually quits in. And it's not the moment you'd expect. It's not the hardest day. It's the day right after you break the streak. You miss a day. You skip the workout, forget the sentence, sleep through the alarm. And in that exact moment, there are 2 paths. One is the path almost all of us default to. You call yourself lazy, undisciplined, a person who always does this. The other path is the one that actually predicts whether you show up again tomorrow. And the research on it is remarkably consistent. Psychologist Kristin Neff's work on self-compassion, done over more than a decade at the University of Texas at Austin, found that people who respond to their own failures with self-compassion, acknowledging the miss without attacking themselves for it, show higher motivation to try again than people who respond with self-criticism. Not lower, higher. Self-criticism feels like accountability, like it's keeping you sharp. What it's actually doing, physiologically, is triggering a threat response, the same machinery that fires when you're in actual danger. And when your brain registers a threat, its instinct isn't to lean in. It's to avoid the source of the pain. The source of the pain, in this case, is the task itself. So the harsher you are with yourself after a miss, the more your own brain quietly starts treating the goal as something to avoid. So move 3 is a script, and it's almost stupidly simple. When you miss a day, you don't say, "I failed again." You say, out loud if you have to, "That attempt didn't land. Here's the one thing I'll adjust." Same information, completely different chemical response. One keeps you in the game tomorrow. The other is the exact thing training your brain to quit. Here's where all 3 moves actually meet. I kept the language app going for over a year, not because I found some reservoir of discipline I never had. I shrank the task until my worst days could still do it. I replaced a superhuman example with someone 1 step ahead of me. And on the days I missed, I stopped treating it as evidence I was broken and started treating it as one data point to adjust from. None of that required a spike of motivation. None of it required me to become a different kind of person. And that's the actual answer to the question we opened with. The one underneath, why do I want to and not do it? It was never about wanting more, or wanting harder, or finding the secret amount of desire that finally makes you disciplined. The want was always sufficient. What was missing was a task sized for the person you actually are on your worst day. Proof borrowed from someone close enough to your own life to count. And a way of talking to yourself that doesn't punish the exact behavior you're trying to repeat. Fix those 3 things, and you don't need motivation. You've built a system that runs without it. So the next time you catch yourself thinking, "I'm just lazy," stop and ask instead, which of the 3 is actually missing right now? 9 times out of 10, that question gets you further in 5 seconds than another pep talk ever will. That's it for this one. If this helped, you know what to do. And I'll see you in the next video.